very, very honored to welcome as our guest this evening Mr. Grant Cameron. And Grant has, for the past 40 years, been on I would have to say, a relentless search for the truth about ufology, the truth about what American presidents knew and when they knew it, the truth about human consciousness. And indeed, he's been at it for over 40 years, and we're so very, very pleased to welcome Grant Cameron. And we're probably going to be talking a good deal about his fascinating book, Alien Bedtime Stories. And so we're looking forward to that. Grant, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Well, thank you, Leslie. I appreciate being on, and I appreciate your interest in what I'm doing.
Wonderful. And let's just sort of jump right into it. I had a question. What, in your opinion, Grant, is the relationship between consciousness and the experiencer contactee phenomena? And is this consciousness, do you feel, increasing or expanding in our contemporary times, and therefore perhaps facilitating more ET contact? Or has heightened consciousness always existed in mankind in roughly the same kind of percentages that it does now?
My opinion as of now is that consciousness is all that there is. There is no time, there is no space, there is no physical world. That's basically it. It's consciousness. And we are starting to learn that through the experiencers. I had my own personal experience with consciousness, which led me to experiencers, where now I spend almost all my time just listening to experiencers, who I believe are the most important people in the world. And that was, I had this download experience February the 26th, 2012 in Phoenix, Arizona, listening to Colin Andrews give a lecture. And it was at that moment I had this download of 3 items that popped into my head. These are items that I had gathered over 37 years. But they all got put together in a microsecond. And they came with, what's hard to describe to people who haven't experienced it, they came with absolute certainty. Mm-hmm. For example, experiencers will talk about this. 40% of all experiencers will say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe, or they knew the answer to everything about themselves, but it was taken away as they left. So, and I would say, well, how do you know there isn't something on the far end of the universe that you don't know about, that the aliens didn't tell you about? And they'll say, well, I don't know. I just know for sure. And that's what happened to me. It came with absolute certainty. And the 3 things that popped into my head were, number 1, the top secret Canadian government document, which Stanton Friedman helped get declassified in 1978. This is the famous Wilbur Smith memo from November of 1950. In that memo, Wilbur Smith is talking to the Americans, and he's relating to the Canadians in his top secret memo what he learned from American officials. The 5th thing that he talked about was, we were also told by American officials, not people on the street, American officials, that other things might be associated with the flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. So he mentioned this in November of 1950, which is extremely important because the first contactees, Adamski and Williamson, would not appear until a couple of days after the detonation of the hydrogen bomb in 1952. The first abductees wouldn't become known until Betty and Barney Hill's book came out in the 1960s, mid-1960s. So in 1950, nobody knew that aliens were telepathic. And yet in 1950, the Canadians are putting out this memo that said the Americans told them that mental phenomena is part of this thing. I now believe, looking back, the reason this probably happened is because when they recovered the Roswell crash, there was 3 dead ones and 1 live alien. And there's been a number of witnesses now who have described this live alien in 1947 talking in people's heads. And I think that's what a lot of the classification is about. Not about where they're from, not about the metal, not about the propulsion system, but this telepathy, this consciousness aspect that they have known since day one, since the Roswell crash. They've known that this mental phenomenon is an extremely important aspect. The second thing that popped into my head during this download experience, we had, back in the 1980s, we had chased a guy by the name of Dr. Eric Walker. He had 14 honorary doctorate degrees. He was the president of Penn State University. The Canadians had led us to this guy through the Canadian Embassy, and a guy by the name of Dr. Robert Sarbacher, who identified Dr. Eric Walker. So we were talking to Walker for about 8 years. There was a number of researchers, about 6 researchers. I was sort of leading these researchers, and everybody's trying to get this guy to talk, and he knew how it all fit together. At one point during the conversation, a guy from Great Britain is interviewing him, and he says to Dr. Walker, what about MJ-12? What about the control group? Is it still Twist 12 guys, and are they still all just Americans? And Walker said, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? That was the second thing that popped into my head. In 1991, when this interview was done, I had no idea what Walker was talking about. In Phoenix, Arizona, when that happened, I instantly knew what he was talking about. And it was the same idea. It was this idea that ESP is the key to the whole thing. And Walker said, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in. And he's talking about the control group. You will not be taken into the control group. Very few people understand how it works. The third thing that popped in my head, and this all happened instantaneously in my head, the third thing that popped into my head was 2 years after Dr. Walker, Jan Hartson, who's the international director from MUFON, as you probably know, it's in my book, Alien Bedtime Stories. I tell the story of Jan Hartson at 9 years old, having this very close encounter with a flying saucer, not a UFO, a flying saucer, about 30 feet away in his backyard at 6:30 on a Saturday morning with his brother. And they're there, they lose an hour and a half time, and he becomes absolutely enthralled with UFOs. He becomes an electrical engineer. He wants to learn how propulsion systems work. He and his brother are trying to build a flying saucer. They're absolutely obsessed with flying saucers. So Jan Hartson is at a lecture. He's an engineer from UCLA, and UCLA alumni engineers bring in Ben Rich. And Ben Rich was the head of Lockheed Skunk Works. This is the rumored agency that back engineers the flying saucers at Area 51. So Ben Rich, at the end of the lecture, his last slide is, he shows a flying saucer, and he says, we now have the technology to take ET home. Jan Hartson says, everybody in the audience laughs. They figure it's a big joke, but people start asking questions. And he says, we've discovered the mistake in the equation. It's not going to take us a lifetime to do, but it's going to take an act of God to get this thing out of Congress because it's so deep black. As he's leaving the building, Jan Hartson, since he was 9 years old, obsessed with flying saucers, realized this is his chance. He goes running after Ben Rich as he leaves the building, and he says, Ben, I need to know. I've been obsessed my whole life with the propulsion system. How does it work, Ben? How do they get here? Ben Rich turns around and he says exactly what Dr. Eric Walker said 2 years before. He said, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? Mm-hmm. And Jan Hartson went, I didn't expect a question. So he said, well, that means everything in time and space is connected. And Ben Rich said, that's how it works. And he walked away, got in his car and drove away. That is how it works. That's how they get here. They understand oneness. They understand there's no time and space. They can move from one point in space to another. And the aliens, through contactees, have been giving us this material. 42% of all experiencers are getting downloads of mathematical material, technical material. They're telling us what's going on. So for the people who believe in the big bad alien, you got to explain, why are they healing people? Why are they downloading people? Why are they doing all this kind of stuff? Because I've had numerous people, because I talk about consciousness now quite a bit, especially the download stuff, because I had my own personal download and I know how powerful this was. And I had a woman, for example, came up to me last year in California after I had lectures, a whole pile of experiencers around me who are talking to me, asking me questions about this download stuff. One woman showed me her cell phone, and on her cell phone was this paper. And I said, you wrote this? She said, yeah, I wrote it. And it was 25 pages long. And I said, did you get this? Was this a download? She said, yeah, it's a download. I know nothing about science. I'm a secretary. And I was just impressed. And there are a lot of these people running around that are being told this thing, and they're putting it together. So consciousness is it. If you go back to the quantum physics world, and you take a look, since 1925, since Heisenberg had a download of the uncertainty principle. It happened in a park in the middle of the night in Copenhagen behind the Bohr Institute, where he got this download about the uncertainty principle, that you cannot measure a particle, the velocity and the location at the same time. And it was at that time when Heisenberg and Bohr came forward at the 1927 Soviet conference, and they brought out this thing that the observer is key, that you do not get a particle take a position in time and space until there's an observer, until you try to measure it. This is the uncertainty principle, the measurement problem in quantum physics, and basically says consciousness is primary. It is the basis of all things. You do not have anything physical. And this really disturbed Einstein, because Einstein believed what most people who aren't really familiar with the consciousness thing in UFOs believe in this thing, that there's a particle in time and space, and the only time that one particle affects the other particle is when they bump into each other, or there's a force field or something like that. And Einstein actually fought with Bohr and Heisenberg. He said this could not be true. Things are independent, that you can measure in time and space, And it turned out that he was wrong, because they've run the experiments and Einstein was wrong. Everything, you have this, what's one of the most dramatic experiments in the 20th century is the discovery of non-locality. And that is the idea that you can have particles that aren't connected to each other that are affected. And that is what comes down to consciousness. Consciousness is all there is. And Einstein didn't like it. He said, I'd like to know that the moon is behind me when I'm not looking. He could not believe this principle. And his last lecture, a number of top physicists have made this statement. One of them was John Wheeler, the guy that came up with the idea for black holes and wormholes and all this kind of stuff. He won a Nobel Prize for physics, and he said it's a participatory universe, that our consciousness helps build the universe. So when Einstein gave his last lecture, gave it at Princeton University for Wheeler's seminar on relativity, he made the crack about this thing that he still didn't believe, this consciousness thing. He said, if a mouse looks at the universe, does that change its nature? And the answer is, yeah, probably it does. It is consciousness that's running the whole thing. So I would say, looking now back, and I've only been in this for 3 years. Before 2012, I probably couldn't have spelled the word consciousness or cared less. I had no interest whatsoever. I was nuts and bolts. I was chasing documents. I was chasing the president. I figured this was the answer. When I had this download experience, everything changed. And looking back now, I would say, the more you look at the UFO phenomena, the deeper you look at it, the less physical it becomes, and the more it becomes this quantum physics thing that it's all consciousness. And when you understand consciousness, when you understand oneness, you understand how they get here, you understand the mind aspects of this phenomena, and you start to understand where the experiencers are relating to us based on what they're being told.
Yeah. And do you think, Grant, and in my work as a hypnotherapist, of course, I'm very focused on working with experiencers and contactees, and a unifying, I don't want to call it a syndrome, if you will, but I think a unifying aspect of their experiences seems to be that if people have had very physical experiences as children, in other words, really being levitated through a window or a car window, that kind of experience, it seems to evolve into a more etheric experience where people are continuing to have experiences, in fact, even more vivid experiences. They're even more real than the physical things that happen as children. But there seems to be a progress, a kind of an evolution in the nature of these experiences to where it's no longer necessary for them to be conducted in a dense physical way.
Yeah, and you when you look at the experiences, the survey, the Edgar Mitchell survey that was done, you start to see this, like 69% or whatever it was have had out-of-body experiences and this sort of thing. I think what happens is that when it first starts, we bring our own fear and emotions into it, and we really don't know what's going on. But the more people deal with it, the more it becomes sort of an enlightening thing where it's less evil. And even when you take a look at the whole evil thing, where if you get someone like Hopkins or Jacobs would say it's like 100% evil. It's like there's nothing good about it. They're intruders. They're you know, all this kind of stuff. If you look at the experiences, only 9% of them actually say that it's an evil. The aliens are evil. And I would say those would be people who have not been through the process, who are just starting out. Yeah. And I think a lot of that is the aliens getting people. Because, for example, most experiencers don't really recall anything till later on in their life. And then they suddenly find out they're lifers. It's been going on their entire life. So there's a period where people are being turned on, when where they say, you know, okay, now it's time for you to remember. So I think a lot of this is being controlled by the non-local or the non-human entities. And I would say that they probably have done this on 1,000 planets. They know exactly what they're doing. Because I relate, if you look back at ufology, you see all these patterns. For example, you see 1897, you see ships with, you know, propellers and wooden ships and guys hanging off ropes. And then suddenly you see the Foo Fighters during World War II, and that stops. And then the green fireballs start, and then they stop. And then you have the contactees appear, and then they stop. And then you have the cattle mutilations start, and you have the crop circles, and you have all these patterns as if we're watching them turn the pages of a book. And I would say, well, what happened to the Foo Fighters? Well, they're probably on another planet that's 100 years behind us. And when the Foo Fighters leave, they're going to send the green fireballs the guy is in. Then they're going to send the contactees. And I think we are just sitting there watching them operate this plan. And the contactees, I believe, firmly, I may be wrong, but I think a lot of people who do the regressions sort of get this question answered, that these people who are volunteering, there is no sort of abduction phenomenon. It's not people being taken against their will. People are making these soul contracts.
Yes, you're so right, Grant. You're completely right. All of my work for the past decade reflects exactly what you're saying, that agreements are made in the same way, really, that we make agreements, I believe, when we come into this physical world. If you're talking about a reincarnation process, but there really is no heaven in my mind in that sense. It's simply a different vibrational situation in which many of our ET friends can negotiate. They can move into what we would call, the heavenly realms. But now, Wes, don't you find that you've been participating with a sort of a contractual agreement at this point in your life?
Yes, I would speak to something you were saying as well, Grant, earlier, that it's almost like an evolutionary path that we follow. Because I recall experiences through sessions with Leslie when I was a kid, when it was very physical. And then I've had maybe 3 or 4 unique experiences where I was called before a council of sorts.
Wow.
And it was like, okay, let's see if these conditions are working for you. Yes or no? Yes, they are. Are you ready to move on to the next step? And I've always said at that point, yes, I'm ready. And consciously, in this day-to-day reality that we're living right now, almost every night I ask for more.
Wow.
I say, bring it on.
Yeah.
And I think they're making some judgment calls about me, saying, well, you might not quite be ready for this, but we'll give you some of this. And it comes in stages. And like yourself, I've gotten all sorts of downloads, and it takes some time to sort of stretch them out and process them.
Yeah, and that's where I think it's important that we deal with the contactees and find out what they're being told. Because I've had experiences where a lot of times the contactees will have a bad time, or something will happen that they don't understand, and the fear starts to come back in. I remember I was if you've ever been to the UFO Congress, the big session in Phoenix, they have about 150 experiencers every morning and every evening that meet twice a day. Yeah. And there were 75 of them in the one room, and I went in, and they were sort of whining and complaining and how tough it was. And then they said, well, they don't really care here at Congress. They've got all the speakers. That's all they care about is the speakers out front. And so I put up my hand and I said, can I speak? And then I said to them, and I absolutely believe it. I tell experiencers this all the time. I said, I've spoken at Congress twice. I'm one of the speakers, and I'm not out there. I'm in here listening to you. Because I said, as far as I'm concerned, you people are playing in the Super Bowl. People don't realize that I said you could have been born and untouchable in the streets of Calcutta and spend your day in the junkyard looking for something valuable enough to sell for food for tomorrow. You didn't get picked to do that. You got picked to play in the Super Bowl. And if you understand the UFO situation, the consciousness aspect that's to it, and how this fits into reality, this is the biggest story of all times. And we got to play in the game. And you may be the water boy, you may be the quarterback, you may be just standing in, but at least you're in the stadium. And you should be very honored that you got to play this game, that you got to. And I see experiencers as very high-level souls. These aren't people who are on the first go-around. These are people who have taken a very rough thing, have a very important job to do. So when I say experiences, when I lecture to experiences, I talk to experiences, I see people who are very, very wise souls who have agreed to come in to do this very important job. And that's one of the things I think that in the world of ufology, we bend over all the time trying to appease the scientific community. I believe the scientific community is behind the cover-up. If it were not for the scientific sort of materialism, this thing would move along. But we have a situation where we believe we're biological robots in a meaningless universe and stuff. And I say, if you can establish what we had talked about before, the reincarnation fact, if you can establish that one single experience, one single abduction goes back before birth. And I can't remember what the stat is, but it's pretty high for the number of experiences who remember stuff before they were born. And I say, you may not believe me if I tell you the story. So I tell them the story of the Moody Blues. And the Moody Blues, big band, sold 50 million albums. Clearly were abducted in 1967. They do not deny it. They draw the alien. They've had all sorts of experiences. They talk about it quite a bit. And during one lecture that Colin Andrews gave, Mike Pinder from the Moody Blues and the lead guitarist came up to him and said, we'd like to talk to you after the lecture. So he went for dinner with these very, very prominent musicians, and they started telling him the story. And Colin said, you could tell they were going back and forth and back and forth. He said, you could tell they weren't making the story up. Tell them this, tell them this. And they were telling this story about how they remember before they were born. They were told what their mission was going to be, and they were in a room with some elders, and they were told, you are going to be musicians, and you are going to put lyrics into songs that will help raise the consciousness of the world. And I say, you may not believe me, but all you need is one case like the Moody Blues, where this thing goes back before birth. It is no longer a physical problem. This now becomes a spiritual situation if it goes back through lives. Yes. It is not just simply aliens here like Santa Claus to bring us free energy or bring us toys or make us happy. They are here. They are alarm clocks. They are here for different reasons. They're here to warn us, to teach us, and the experiencers are working with them to elevate the earth into whatever this period that we have to go through right now. It's a very, very important mission. And so I always look with great respect to anybody who's an experiencer. They have a very important mission, and I listen very carefully to what they say, because they have the answers. You cannot determine what's going on with UFOs by watching red lights, green lights, fast ones, slow ones flying around the sky. You cannot find out what's going on until you talk to somebody like Travis Walton, who was up in the top of the skyscraper looking down at these little things moving around and decided to take the elevator down and flag one down and get inside and talk to whoever's driving these things. That's when you start learning what's going on, when you talk to the intelligence behind the phenomena.
Indeed. And it's, it's not all that unusual, Grant, in doing a past life regression with an individual who may not necessarily have an awareness of extraterrestrial contact, for them to visit a life in another type of body. It's usually, I would say, hominid. I mean, there's a basic design for the universe. I think 2 legs, 2 arms, a head. Beyond that, anything goes. But it happens much more frequently than you would probably think, where people come just for a past life regression. They're expecting a little trip to a medieval times, or some toga wearing a cat, but it turns out that they look down at their feet and they see alien feet, and then or for lack of a better term. So my own personal feeling is that we frequently incarnate on other planets. And what we're talking about as aliens, that's kind of a ridiculous concept, really. It's a concept that will pass away with time when we have a deeper understanding of what's actually happening. And
just to speak to something you said, Grant, before Leslie gets into her next question for you, it was about 7 years ago where I was in a position you might have been 3 or 4 years ago. I knew something was happening to me, and something spectacular had to take place to bring me to see Leslie. That's right. After I started to see Leslie, the floodgates opened, and ever since then it's been a participatory experience.
And you can negotiate with.
Wonderful.
You can actually negotiate with a lot of the clients. I kind of bring them through this process where if they're not getting enough sleep, if too much is going on at night, and you can say to them, I enjoy working with you, I want to work with you, but my physical body needs more sleep. And then like magic, suddenly they're communicating only on maybe the 2 nights a week that they want to. So we're not powerless here. We can speak directly to the beings that we're interacting with. There's nothing stopping us. Only our own fear, our own trepidation is stopping us. There's nothing stopping us from non-local communication, as you so eloquently said. And speaking of that, Grant, I know you have done some tremendously fascinating work on the hemispheres of the brain, and I'm just going to quote something you put up on your website. Nobel Prize winner Roger Wolcott Sperry has said that when it comes down to it, or what it comes down to, is that modern society discriminates against the right hemisphere. And so is the balance between our two brains a balance what we should be striving for, or is there perhaps some sort of method that's been lost in the sands of time that would allow us to independently control or stimulate the two hemispheres depending on what kind of tasking we might want to complete?
Both sides of the brain have their roles. I've done a book which has been done for a year, which was based after I had my download experience, where I started looking at this right brain, left brain. So your left brain has its role, but when I was looking at the paranormal phenomena, I was looking at experiencers, I was looking at musicians, and what I basically came to conclude is that in the world of paranormal phenomena, we parse everything. So I remember dealing with experiencers, and one particular experiencer from Boulder, Colorado said she knew I was doing this, and I was dealing with channelers. And she said, well, don't stick me in with those people. I mean, I'm not a channeler. We're not channelers. We're experiencers. We're not those people. They're that's garbage. And what I found is that we parse all this stuff, but it's all the same thing. It's absolutely the same thing. And what it is that the left brain is your rational, analytical. It's an atheist brain. It's the one that's a scientific brain, and it's necessary for certain things. But when you can shut it down, you get paranormal phenomena. If you're doing regression, what do? You quiet the left brain.
Oh yeah, we go right past it.
If you're doing psychedelics, or you're doing psilocybin or ayahuasca or something like that, the first thing they will tell you that happens when they're in this state is the ego is absolutely crushed. The left brain is completely shut down. If you take a look at remote viewing, if you take a look at Monteagle, who is the top remote viewer, number one, they asked him, what's the key thing? He says, you have to shut down the ego mind. You have to shut down the left brain. If you're doing, for example, a lot of mediums have had child abuse, female mediums. One study showed 13 out of 16. And what that is, it's this disassociation process, that if you have a very rough childhood, if you're being abused or you have this kind of stuff, you're able to shut down the physical world. You're able to shut it off. And when you do that, you pop into the other world. So that's what I think is happening, is if you can shut down the left brain through meditation, through psychedelics, through regression, whatever technique you use, you are able, the right brain is able to tap into the non-local universe. It's able to download answers. And that's what happened to me. When I went to the Colin Andrew lecture, that's the last place I wanted to be. Because if you know Congress, it goes from 8 o'clock in the morning till like 11 o'clock at night. You don't go to all the lectures. I had no interest in crop circles. The only reason I went was because it was Colin Andrews. He was a very prominent researcher. I figured, well, I should pay this guy respect. I mean, he's a big researcher. I should go in there. I'm really not interested. So I was sitting in there basically in an altered state. I was thinking about going across to the library on the other side, on the Arizona side, and I'm just thinking, and I was sort of out of it. And when you can do that, enter that altered state, when you can shut the left brain down, where you go into that little state, boom, you just immediately it comes in. So that's the role of the two brains. But it's the left brain that keeps us in this physical world, and you need the left brain to exist in the physical world. But if you take a look, for example, I did a whole chapter. I do for example, Diane Hennessy Powell does this, and I did a lot of research on savants and autistic, and they all have left brain damage. And what you see is these kids who cannot button their shirt, who cannot do anything, and you can ask them the year 131,343 on July the 11th, what day of the week will it be? And the kid will go, oh, it's a Tuesday. And he will be right. He will be right every single time. Because their left brain is shut down, that's when you get these kids who are able to pop into this other thing and do, 6 digits multiplied by 6 digits. And then you ask them what's 4 times 7, and they can't tell you what 4 times 7 is, but they can take these huge 15, 16-digit prime numbers and stuff like that. They're in this right brain, tapping into it. And Diane Hennessy Powell showed this. She has the one particular girl, her name was Haley, and Haley was really autistic, really bad left brain damage. And this was the girl who hit 161 numbers in a row. Gave her numbers targets, and she hit 161 in a row. It's like pure telepathy, almost like alien telepathy, not just, you know, getting the odd guess right. She was very good. And there was a girl in the United Arab Emirates who was especially just as good. She could do numbers, she could do sentences, all this kind of stuff, but couldn't really talk, you know, was very hard to deal with and stuff like that. And so you see this thing, when you shut the left brain down, you can go into there. So that's where you as a regressionist have this ability to shut this person's right brain down, get that rational analytical brain to quieten down, and then you can start accessing the real information, the non-local information, the akashic record, the collective unconscious, whatever you want to call it. That's all it is turning that rational analytical brain off and allowing yourself to go into the non-local world and download whatever what you need to do.
Yeah.
So it's a question of access then, right?
Yeah.
Because the info is always there.
Yeah, everybody has the ability.
Never there, right?
Yeah, everybody has the ability, but some people don't have the ability. For example, people have tried to regress me, and I've never been successful. I'm the type of person where I just can't shut the left brain down.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sitting there in a meditation experience. I remember one huge thing. I was trying to learn to meditate, and I was in a big group that was meditating, and they went through this whole 2-hour thing, and during the meditation is the quiet time, and I'm sitting there, all of a sudden hear this buzzing noise, and I'm thinking, all I can think about is, what's that buzzing noise? What's going on? and then the next time I asked somebody there, and I said, oh, that's the fridge. The fridge went on in the kitchen behind me. So I couldn't even go back to this place again, because every time I'd go to meditate, after an hour and a half, you'd go to the quiet time, and I go, I wonder when the fridge is going to go. So that's the thing, is you have to be able to shut that left brain down. And some people have it done for them through brain, like Edgar Casey. You take all these examples. Edgar Casey got hit with a baseball. The famous psychic, I remember, the one that was originally the CIA guy, fell off a ladder and hit his head. These kind of things happen where you have these brain injuries, and a lot of that is almost like the aliens putting you in a position where, for example, 35% of all experiencers, according to Edgar Mitchell's group's survey, have had near-death experiences. And they were going to set a committee, and they were going to say, well, we need a committee. Well, how can this possibly be true? And I said, what do you mean? You don't need a committee. This is very easy to explain why that's true. And they said, well, no, we're going to find it. I said, you're looking at a random world. We've fallen into this scientific thing that it's a random world. It's just chance. It's all meaningless chance. But if you can read the future, and you've had people, and maybe you can read the future, people have had these things where you can see the future. So if you can see the future, if you have a car accident tomorrow and you have a near-death experience, is that a random incident? No. It's the same thing. So a person who's an experiencer decides to come in and have the experience of having the abduction experience and raise consciousness through that. And they've also decided to have the near-death experiences. And that's why you have 35% of experiencers who've had near-death experiences, because they've chosen to have both. Neither is a random. The abduction is not random. It's chosen, and the near-death experience is chosen. The people are doing these things to learn lessons. And that's basically what it comes down to. Whether you believe in the alien thing, if you believe in the reincarnation world, we've come into this world for some particular reason. And we've got something to do. And that's the way I look at the whole thing. Because people will look at disclosure, and I say, disclosure, means nothing. It really doesn't matter. That's like the weather. That's like your team winning the Super Bowl. It really doesn't mean anything because it doesn't change your life. Your life is one thing. What were you put on this earth to do? And where are you? And are you doing what you're supposed to do? And where are you going? It really doesn't matter whether disclosure happens out there or whether what the weather changes or whatever. You only have one thing to worry about, and that is, what is my role? So I see my role as being very honored that I got picked to play in this game. That I'm very honored that and all I do is all day long is I think of two things. One was the biblical expression, too much is given, much is expected. And the Edgar Casey statement, knowledge not used is sin. That you'd be better off not knowing anything. Once you know what's going on, then the onus is on you to share it, to put it out there. Because it's one thing to know it. It's a much more important thing to share what you've got with the rest of the world. Because knowledge not used is sin. It's been in my head my entire life. So I'm just very driven to make sure that what I know, I try to get out to other people. Because it really doesn't help me if I learn it. It only helps if I share it.
Yes.
And you're remembering things, right, Grant? And that's the way I look at my life. It's a series of rememberings.
Yeah.
So I'll remember something, and then it's like, oh, I got to hang on to this, number one. Number two is I got to tell somebody. I got to share it.
Yeah,
Indeed.
exactly.
And Grant, why do you think that we are so attached to the limiting belief systems that really prevent many people from turning on their right brain. And I suppose I'm talking about religious limitations. Why have we created these constructs? Is it fear? Is it, I don't really think in paranoid terms of being controlled or anything. I don't think that way at all. So I'm not even going to put that out there, but because I don't think we need any help to limit ourselves. I think we're very good at it. We come in. Yeah. That being able to do that, but these limiting belief systems are now, I think, at a toxic level in our society.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is people are at whatever level they are. So when I look at somebody who's sort of off the rails, I realize, well, at one point I was probably exactly where they are. That people have that sort of thing, and whether it's family or friends where they really don't catch on. I think a lot of it has to do with people are busy because we're in a physical world where it's like whoever's got the most toys when they die wins, and we're playing this game of collect stuff. And we're also in a situation where we want someone to do it for us. And you see this in the elections, this particularly thing where you see whether it's Sanders or whether it's Trump, where you get these people who are absolutely obsessed, and they're just in there. And I say this is almost like a cult figure. This is almost like somebody who has all the answers and is offering comfort. Whatever you want, I'm going to give to you, and people will hand it over and say that guy's going to do it. And I keep saying there is no political messiah. There is nobody out there who is going to bring you what you need. You have to get it for yourself. But people are willing to sort of give their vote to whatever politician, thinking that politician is going to give them whatever they want. And we want it, because we're sort of in the Western society, we don't just want it, we want it yesterday. Yeah, it's just sort of like, and that's what ufology a lot of time comes down to. It's people who are just interested in a good story. It's almost like during the last century where you had very rich people would bring in people to do seances. And they would do, seances. It was entertainment. And a lot of the stuff is for people, it's just entertainment. They're just interested in the story. They're really not interested when it comes down to actually doing something about it. They're really not interested because they're so busy with their life that this is just sort of a sort of a sideline for them, something that they're interested in. So people will hand off their power, and they will just busy, almost like when you go to church. You're busy the whole week. You're doing whatever to get ahead, and then you spend the 1 week going to church, and you figure, well, that's what you need to get saved. And I came through that world, so that's what it is. People will hand off to a power figure, whether it's a politician or whatever, and that's when you see what happens is people actually believe this. They actually believe that there's a messiah, like when Oprah said about Obama, and when he was running, he's the one. He's the one we've been waiting for. And this whole thing started about Obama being the one. He was like the messiah. And what happens when a president gets in, he comes in with like 70% approval ratings, and after the first 100 days is down to about 40 because everybody realizes it's just another politician. I keep telling people, they're just politicians. You have to worry about your life. Nobody's going to save you. We have to change our own diapers.
So he wasn't Neo.
No, he was not Neo. He wasn't even paleo. Grant, your really fascinating book, Alien Bedtime Stories, has over 71 tales, and is the result, of course, of your extensive 40 years of research into UFO phenomena and extraterrestrial contact. Can you tell us a little bit about the extraterrestrial named Alpha, who appears in one of the most compelling stories from your book?
Yeah, this is a story that not many people know. I was actually talking to the Toronto Sun today about this, and he sort of listened to the story, and it was the same thing. He listened to the story, and he said, okay, thanks. And it was like, oh, I know he's not going to write anything about this. The Canadian government was big time into this. People don't realize this. When this thing first started, in 1949, 1950, the Canadian government got involved in this, and Wilbert Blockhouse Smith was the guy who ran the Canadian government program. And if you go back and look at Fate magazines and all these different magazines back then, he was one of the top respected researchers in the world. He was a Canadian guy. He was highly respected, and he had the classified material. He was running the Canadian government program on flying saucers from 1950 to 1954. And what most people don't know is that he was an experiencer. He was, and in those days, like, you didn't bring it up. It was very, very, now it's like, okay, people know, people are actually in contact with aliens. This is not This is not something new. But back then, it was really toxic to talk about it. But he was very open about the fact that he was in contact with a number of aliens. And one was Tyler. Tyler was given the job of cleaning up the atmosphere with all the atomic tests that we were doing. And Alpha was the main alien. Now, Wilbur Smith, ran the Canadian government program, was in contact with Alpha, but so was a woman from Maine who lived down the street from Betty and Barney Hill, surprisingly. And she was the sort of the last of the contactees that moved into the Greys. It happened down the street. It was just really, really weird how it happened. But anyway, she taught the CIA, she taught a guy by Nisham from the CIA how to channel Alpha, this alien. He went back, and if you look up on YouTube, if you look up UFOs, It Has Begun, you will see the story told in that documentary about the CIA channeling Alpha in July of 1959 at the National Photographic Interpretation Center in Washington, D.C. And this was one of the most top secret CIA buildings in the country. This was where they analyzed all the U-2 and all the SR-71 photographs. But they basically got in contact with Alpha, and they said, we want to see you. And this is this famous story where the flying saucer flies by the window in Washington and over top of the Capitol. Mm-hmm. And all these high-level guys, Art Lundahl, the guy who briefs the president on the Cuban Missile Crisis and on UFOs, was in the room when this happened. This is told by Bob Friend on camera. He tells a story. This is not something somebody made up. But the Canadians were in contact, and the messages that Alpha gave were very important. Alpha was basically giving the same message that the experiences are now, that the time has come, we're here, we have to raise consciousness. And he would say some very interesting things. He was talking about stop the nuclear weapons, and he was talking about the fact that he would never interfere. The beings would never interfere unless there was a nuclear exchange. Mm-hmm. And at that point, they would step in. That was the only time they would step in, but they would be stepping in to save not us, but the planet. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times I tell people, you think they're here to save us? Forget it. They're here to save the planet. Mm-hmm. We are just, as David Bohm, the famous physicist, said, we are the locusts that have descended upon the earth. We are nothing special. And so he said, and to prove that we can stop a nuclear exchange, we can take the moon in front of the entire world, split it in half, and put it back together in microseconds to prove that we can stop a nuclear exchange. But other than stopping a nuclear exchange, the beings that are watching this planet are just going to sit and watch the world stew in its own juices. Mm-hmm. You have to learn your own lessons. You have to learn what's going on. We can't do it for you. We can give you, we can direct you. And Wilbur Smith said this numerous times, and he wrote a book called The New Science, which I may try to republish part of this book. And The New Science was actually dictated to him, and he says right in the beginning of the book, this was dictated to him by beings more advanced than we are. So there was an actual book called The New Science. It was written and Wilbur never finished the last chapter because he died in 1962. But the Canadian government was in contact with aliens. They were actually going to land this alien at Suffield, Alberta, at the big top secret army base where they did the nerve gas experiments that had the no-fly zone like Area 51. Mm-hmm. They were going to land it, and the Canadian government, the Saint Laurent's cabinet, would not give an agreement that they would allow it to take off. And so Wilbur said, it's not going to land then. But the arrangements had been made, and if you go back to 1967, look at the top story in July the 1st, 1967, Paul Hellyer gives a speech in St. Paul, Alberta. Mm-hmm. And I talked to Paul about this a number of times, and he said, I don't remember giving this speech. I don't remember where it came from. But he said, this is not the first time in St. Paul, Alberta, that we had a landing base. We had one in 1954 for UFOs to land, and nothing ever landed there. But he didn't tell the rest of the story. The story was told by Wilbur Smith's wife. Yes, Wilbur had said, Alpha will land at Suffield if you don't shoot it down. The agreement was made, but then he couldn't get 100% agreement to be allowed to take off again. So the whole thing was called off. But the Canadian government has actually admitted they opened that base for UFOs to land. And the obvious question is, well, how do the aliens know where to land? How do they know where to go? They knew because Wilbur Smith was in contact and was arranging the whole thing. Very fascinating story that the Canadians were actually ahead of everybody else, and they were in the loop. They were being told what was going on in the United States. And James Smith, who's still alive, has told me, and he's told it on record a number of times, that at the end, before his father died, his father confirmed, yes, the Americans showed him the craft and showed him the bodies. And this was going back to his death in 1962. So the Canadians were big time into this thing with the Americans. And once the Wilbur Smith got cut out of the program when they shut it down, then it reverted to the Americans, and now I don't really know what the Canadians are doing. But in the beginning, the Canadians were very much involved with what was going on, as much as the Americans.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Grant, certainly there are, I don't want to give the impression that there's only one type of being out there that's interacting with us. There are, what did the last hearings in Washington decide? There were, 80 some different beings, and certainly people tell me about everything from very Nordic looking beings who are very similar to us, maybe taller, a wide variety of grays. Even there are benevolent, even insectoid beings. And and some of these beings don't necessarily have the desire or capability to physicalize in our world in the way that we would like them to, but they can sort of project themselves holographically, or in the way that a being like Bashar does, through Darryl Anka. So there's a wide variety of experience out there, and a wide variety of beings. Do you think that there is a kind of a Gene Roddenberry-like association of planets where certain big decisions, certain non-interference decisions, certain decisions about what to do about renegade aliens that might have engaged in some unsavory behavior? Do you think that organization exists?
Yes, I believe it exists, but the more I look at it, the less I believe there's evil aliens.
Right.
I believe that the reason that they get here is, as Walker said, unless you this understanding of time and space being one, you have to understand the concept of oneness, that everything is one. And so people will say, well, the aliens are fighting with each other. And I say, well, do you think that makes any sense if they're telepathic? You know where I'm going to shoot. I know where you're going to shoot. And we both know who's going to win the war. So why would you have a war? I mean, it makes no sense if you know what the other person's going to do. And so we have this thing. There definitely are, because a lot of experiencers, I think Wes even talked about, that there are a lot of experiencers who will claim to be actually brought in front of this council, that they know who these groups are. Even today, there's 1,200 planets announced today, new planets that have been announced, and they only had 1,000. They've doubled it just today. They're up to 2,200 planets. I would say that the way it works is the whole thing that there's patterns throughout the universe. So if there's oxygen here, there's going to be oxygen there. There's DNA here, and that's one of the key things about breeding with these beings, is that if they're breeding with us, we can't breed with chimpanzees, but we can breed with them, which would tend to indicate that DNA is universal. It's everywhere in the universe, and so I would say that there are probably every solar system probably has a planet. Every solar system has beings, that this is going to be the pattern. So you're going to be talking as many civilizations as there are star systems, as there are galaxies and this sort of thing. The numbers are just astronomical, almost like infinite. And but we do have these number of people reporting, these committees that, groups who make sort of rules about how it works. But I think the way we don't get off the planet, people have this idea that we're quarantined. I don't think we're quarantined. We're quarantined because we don't understand oneness. We believe in evil, and the belief in evil is what causes evil. If I believe that you're evil, I can kill you, I can drop a bomb on you. If I don't believe anybody's evil, well then I'm not going to do anything. It is the belief in evil that causes evil. It's Hitler that believed the Jews were evil that caused him to go and try to kill it. And so we think the Chinese are evil, we think the Mexicans are evil, and we change it. It used to be the Japanese were evil. And then I say, what would happen to the Japanese? What did the evil evaporate? And suddenly now they're our friends, we're trading with them. And so evil is this relative sort of thing that changes. And basically, I think that the reason that we can't get off the planet is we have this idea of separation, that there's me versus you, good versus bad. And once you understand, as Ronald Reagan says, how we would unite if we were faced with a threat from an alien nation, how we would all realize we're just God's children. We're one. We're all the same thing. And that's what stops us from leaving the planet. We do not understand that there's no time and space. We do not understand there's no physical world. We do not understand this oneness, that we're all leaves on a tree. And we the way we work it, and what the aliens are trying to tell us, we believe that it's like there's an evil branch. Okay, so let's cut off the Arab branch. Let's cut off the Jewish branch. Let's cut off this branch. And we basically cut off the branches, not realizing that we're all leaves on the same tree. And that the tree needs the leaves and the leaves need the tree. And the aliens are saying, quit cutting branches off the tree, because eventually you're going to cut all the branches off and the tree is going to die. That is the message. Oneness. You've got to realize we're all one. We're all connected. That's how it works. And the basis of that is consciousness. Consciousness, there is only one consciousness. And everything, it comes out of consciousness. It's an expression of the one consciousness. That's basically what it's coming down to. The more I work, the more it turns into that. And I think the more people in the UFO community are realizing, because I started in 1975, and the stuff we're talking about today is absolute crazy. It would have locked me up in 1975. We have come so far from 1975. We understand consciousness. We understand experiencers. We're putting this together, and the beings are helping us put this together. I think we're getting very close to understanding how this thing works. But we have to listen to the experiencers. They're the ones with the message. They're the ones that are being told what's going on.
Just one question for you, Grant, that's not diverting from the subject, but actually speaks to it, and I think our viewers might be interested in this too. You use the word understanding oneness a lot, or the words understanding oneness. Do you mean accept, internalize and accept oneness?
Yeah, but there's still an understanding, because that's what differentiates us from the aliens. We believe in separation. We believe in everything separate. It's random objects floating around in time and space, and none of that is true. Everything is all united. Everything's connected, and you can even see that with psychedelics. With you go back and look at some of the lyrics from the Beatles. We're one as well. All these oneness things that they have, where the deeper you go, the more you learn and stuff like that. The oneness is the key concept. I think there's 51% of all experiencers claim to have been talked to about oneness. That the aliens actually talked about this concept. Yeah. So this is a concept that. To me, it comes down to it's understanding. It's either separate, everything is separate, or everything is one. When you fully understand the concept that everything is one, and I mean everything is one, there is only one thing, then I think you could start to put this thing together. But as long as we believe they're coming through time and space, and they've got these engines that move them through time and space, and they're over there and we're over here, we're just totally off base, and we're never going to if we believe this is a physical phenomena, we are never going to solve it. We will not solve it until we move off that physical paradigm, which we're blocked into by the modern science. It's a materialistic, atheistic culture that says you're a random biological robot in a meaningless universe, and nothing means anything. And we're moving away from that now. But again, the message is coming. It's coming through inspiration, through experiencers that they're learning. If it weren't for experiencers, we wouldn't know anything that we know right now. It's by listening to experiences that we're putting this puzzle together.
Yes, that's so very true, Grant. Now, believe it or not, we just have a few moments left, but I did want to talk about your upcoming book, which sounds fascinating. The Clinton UFO storybook. Is that a tentative title, or is
If I could get it up, I'm trying to put it on right now. The New York Times did the story yesterday, and they're dead on the mark. They tell the story that I'm going to tell in the book. And basically, it's just the historic account of Bill and Hillary Clinton, who were fascinated with the subject. Bill used the word. He was fascinated with the subject. Hillary said she's interested in the subject. And they were just a 300-page book. There's a lot about the Clintons that people don't know. Their involvement, Hillary's involvement in the 1990s, the number of times they talked about UFOs, Barack Obama's role, John Podesta's role, Hillary, this discussion that she's going to disclose. And it's a historic thing. I stay away from what I call third-level conversation. I don't get into the gossip about who slept with who and who did what. Highest level conversation is ideas. Next level is things. Lowest level is talking about people who aren't in the room. I try to stay on the first level, ideas. What were the Clintons' ideas of UFOs? And so I go through the whole historic thing, the Rockefeller Initiative, Rockefeller going to the White House, where the Roswell reports came from, all this kind of stuff. And I just detail it like a historic book. So because I've written a lot on the Clintons for 20 years. And I figured because it looks like Hillary will win, she will be the next president, and there's this offer to disclose, I said I will put it all on the record, exactly what their history is. And it's a fascinating story.
Excellent, excellent. That's marvelous, Grant. And certainly, if folks want to talk with you or send you an email or order one of your many books, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Well, White House UFO at Gmail is my gmail.com. White House UFO at Gmail if they want to talk to me. Most of my stuff is on my website, which is the President's UFO website, presidentialufo.com.
Mm-hmm.
And I post a lot of my alien rock stuff and my stuff that comes very quickly on my Facebook site, my Presidential UFO Facebook site. I'll put stuff on there, not every day, but I basically just post the latest interesting little tidbits about because I do a lot on alien rock connection, the connection between music and aliens, and I put a lot of the stuff on the political stuff. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
And if I could just ask you one final question, do you think, Grant, that this, going back to the two brains in one, the two hemispheres of the brain, do you think that this is also kind of a pattern of intelligent beings in the universe and beyond, that they are also operating with that same type of duality of brain, if in fact they are physical?
They are working with both, but they operate the right. They operate mostly out of the right. Left brain is fear. Right brain is love. And you can see they're very, very right brain, the things they're doing. It's the right brain that believes in oneness. It's the left brain that believes in separation. So you start looking at these patterns, and they still have the left, but they have this, you don't see the fear with them. You don't see the judgment, all this kind of stuff. And they're operating out of love. They're very sort of right brain. They're able to control the left brain. They're able to sort of shut it down, whereas our left brain is basically running the show. And that's where you have the fear, where people are just panicked and they're trying to analyze this thing and rationalize this thing.
Yeah.
And once you can get them to quiet their mind and you can get them over there, then suddenly the fear disappears and it all goes away. It's the fear that causes the abduction idea and the what's going on. And it's the same with near-death experiences. You'll see the same thing with near-death experiences, with meditation and with lucid dreaming. That what we believe we take into that experience. That in psychedelic experiences, you'll have people who get into these the devil shows up and evil aliens and all this kind of stuff, and near-death experiences, all that kind of stuff. Because you've got to realize, as Bashar said, when you go to sleep, that's when you wake up. And when you think you're waking up, you're actually going to sleep. It is, the aliens live in that. You have a conscious mind, you have the collective unconscious, the superconscious, and in between you have the template reality. That's where the aliens live. That's why aliens come to people in dreams. And Bashar even said that. We come to you in dreams because that's the world we live in. And people have to start understanding it's not a physical world. It's a dream world. And if you look at the work that was done at Stanford University by Stephen LaBerge on lucid dreaming, I say it's more important than the UFO subject. It talks to you about what is template reality. How does the mind actually build stuff? Stephen LaBerge on lucid dreaming. Watch these lectures. Actually describe exactly what's going on with experiences. They're in that template reality thing where it's a dream world where you're building stuff. And when you bring fear into that world, you're going to have a fearful experience. It doesn't mean that it's a fearful experience. You're bringing that stuff in, and that's something we have to learn to accept that that's what's happening.
I agree with you completely, Grant. And my whole raison d'etre, my whole thing is about dispelling fear. That's
Beautiful.
If I could put it in one little word, that's really what we're trying to do here. Grant Cameron, I cannot thank you enough for joining us on Contact TV. It has been an absolute delight.
Wonderful.
And I look forward to seeing you probably back here in the T-Dot this summer, I would imagine.
Yeah,
and,
beautiful,
and like that. And thank you once again, Grant. You have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day. Bless you for all the work that you do. And we'll be talking to you again soon.